This is the brand new Vivo X200 Ultra, and this is the Vivo X200 Pro. In this video, we'll compare the photo and video capabilities of these two top-tier camera phones on the market. Alright, friends, let's get started.
Hey friends, this video was translated using a neural network, so the sound quality isn't the best. If you want to listen to the original sound from a smartphone and hear the audio recording test, just follow the link in the description to our original video.
Both smartphones are fully charged to 100%. Let's go shoot.
Friends, as usual, the first test is 4K at 60 frames per second, using the front camera.
I'm in ideal conditions, meaning I have diffused light.
There are no overexposed areas in the background. Everything looks as beautiful and clear as possible.
And this is what it looks like if you film yourself on.
The front camera is shooting in 4K at 60 frames per second.
When shooting in good lighting, the Ultra has a lower exposure. There are also differences in color reproduction. The image here is cooler. The skin appears darker with a brownish tint, while on the X200 Pro it's warmer, and the face looks lighter with a reddish hue. When the sky gets into the frame, you can see that on the Pro it shifts toward turquoise shades, while on the Ultra it's a true blue, looking more natural.
And now I'm going to step into bright light when the sun is shining strongly from behind.
This is what it looks like if you film yourself against the light, meaning when there's a very bright light behind you.
When shooting against the sun, we see a similar situation. On the X200 Ultra, the sky and my shirt look more natural, while on the X200 Pro, again, they shift toward turquoise. But the skin tone here changes depending on how the light hits the camera, so it's hard to judge the difference. When running, both front cameras performed uncertainly. We see background shake in both cases. Unfortunately, in the Ultra version, they still haven't improved the stabilization here. By the way, what about the technical specs? The X200 Ultra has a front camera with 50 megapixels and an f/2.45 aperture. The sensor size is 1/2.76 inches. It has autofocus. The X200 Pro has a simpler module, 32 megapixels, f/2.0 aperture, a smaller sensor, January 3rd, 42 inches, and no autofocus.
Friends, let's check how our smartphones perform when we activate Dolby Vision mode.
Right now, this is regular shooting in SDR.
Both smartphones, Vivo X200 Ultra,
And the Vivo X200 Pro, all in 4K.
and now I've activated Dolby Vision mode, which means the maximum dynamic range.
And this is what the image looks like. I actually like the picture on the Vivo X200 Ultra.
Overall, everything looks quite nice.
Whereas on the Vivo X200 Pro, well, the colors are just really cranked up.
And as for my face, the sun is shining brightly on me right now, so my face doesn't look great.
When shooting with the front camera and Dolby Vision, the X200 Pro really delivers a very vibrant result in terms of lighting. Some people might like that kind of look, but I personally prefer the result from the Ultra, which appears softer and more natural.
And right now, these are super challenging conditions. That is, when the sun is shining brightly from behind.
Dolby Vision works completely differently if you look at it this way.
When shooting against the sun, we notice a difference not only in saturation, but also in white balance. The Ultra produces a very warm image with reddish-brown skin tones and rather pale colors. On the X200 Pro, the colors are still cranked up. The image is cooler and, once again, has a turquoise tint, and in some areas, the skin even looks kind of gray.
Friends, now I've activated video portrait mode with the background blur effect. Right now, I'm standing in the shade. I specifically stepped into the shade to show how the smartphone handles it. If you shoot in fairly simple conditions, when there's no overexposure on the face. And now I'm stepping out into the sunlight, and let's see how our smartphones perform.
Unfortunately, even in the Ultra flagship, we still don't have 4K recording in portrait mode on the front camera, and that's definitely disappointing. When shooting with the light, the situation is similar to the regular mode. The Ultra produces a slightly darker and more natural image, while the X200 Pro is more exposed, with a turquoise tint in the sky and on my shirt. Skin tones on the Ultra look more tanned and brown, while on the Pro they appear more reddish. Overall, it's the same as what we've already seen before. When it comes to background blur and detail, both cameras perform equally well. I can't single out either one here.
Right now, I'm filming in difficult conditions.
Behind me, the sun is shining really brightly, at the same time on my face.
So, as a result, there will be enough light.
When shooting against the sun, the Ultra once again gives a warm image with a reddish skin tone, but the face looks pretty good as long as the sun's rays aren't hitting it directly. On the X200 Pro, the image is cooler, again with a turquoise tint, and the face appears darker. Both handle running rather poorly. The background jitters and shakes, but despite that, both cameras manage to keep the background blur pretty steady, even with all that shaking.
Alright, friends, right now, we're filming everything around us at 0.6x on both smartphones. So, we have an ultra-wide angle here. How does the image look overall?
On the ultra-wide camera, the Ultra has higher detail, the path, the grass, the leaves. Everything looks more refined than on the X200 Pro. You can also see a difference in dynamic range. On the X200 Ultra, the foliage and palm trees in the background are more exposed, but the blown-out highlights in the sky when coming out from under the trees fade away faster on the Ultra. In the stabilization test, both performed quite well. There are some minor shakes, but overall the footage remains pretty smooth.
Today, my lovely daughter Masha is assisting me.
And today we're going to record a video together.
And right now, I'm using the ultra-wide-angle lens on the Note 6X.
Now we're walking together with her, showing how the image stabilization works.
When filming a person, the X200 Ultra produces a brighter foreground, which makes the skin look slightly overexposed and gives it a yellowish tint. On the X200 Pro, skin looks more natural and pleasant under direct lighting. However, when the face is in shadow and the background is well lit, you can see that the Ultra has a wider dynamic range with this lens. We can clearly see both the foreground and the background. Meanwhile, on the X200 Pro, the background indoors is overexposed and the person in the shadow looks noticeably darker. I should also point out the difference in white balance. The 200 Ultra once again produces a warmer result, while the Pro gives a slightly cooler image. When shooting against the sun, the X200 Ultra delivers a higher quality result. The face is better lit, while the contrast and shadows are preserved. On the X200 Pro, the face looks darker and flatter. There's almost no depth to it. Now, let's test the stabilization. And here, too, the X200 Ultra performs more confidently. On the X200 Pro, we see background blur and the background is heavily overexposed, and my daughter Masha looks like she's getting blurred while moving. The Ultra doesn't have these issues.
So, friends, this is what the footage looks like if you shoot at 1.5x, which is the main lens on the Vivo X10 Ultra.
And 1x2 on the Vivo X200 Pro. This is the kind of image you get.
On the Ultra, it's 1.5x, not 1x like we're used to. And I'll tell you, this is not a usable option at all for shooting, especially if you're filming yourself. But we'll get to that a bit later, and right away. I noticed that the X200 Ultra has worse stabilization. The image wobbles from side to side. Otherwise, the video on both smartphones looks almost identical. When running, you can see that the X200 Ultra really does have issues with stabilization on the main lens, whereas the X200 Pro holds the frame more steadily.
Friends, this is what shooting at 1.5x looks like on the Vivo X200 Ultra.
And 1x on the Vivo X200 Pro.
The conditions aren't exactly easy. There's some overexposure in the background.
Now I'll move over this way. Here. And now, the conditions are pretty simple.
We've got Masha in the frame. Everything looks beautiful.
When filming a person, we see the main problem again. The X200 Pro has a glare across the entire frame, which, fortunately, the Ultra doesn't have. Now, about the 1.5x value. When I film myself, as usual, at this zoom level, even my head doesn't really fit in the frame. The field of view is just too narrow, and it's impossible to film yourself, even with your arm fully extended. As for color reproduction, under normal conditions, everything looks pretty similar, maybe just the skin tone. On the X200 Ultra, it's a bit lighter and more reddish, while on the X200 Pro, it's darker and leans more toward brown. But by the way, most likely because of the tighter framing, the X200 Ultra produces quite a strong optical blur when filming a person. But when running, both smartphones performed well and kept the image steady with confidence.
Friends, now I've set it to 1x on the Vivo X200 Ultra.
And 1x Vivo X200 Pro.
The image is a bit more zoomed in now.
And it turned out to be 1x.
When shooting with digital zoom up to 1x on the ultra-wide lens of the X200 Ultra, it's immediately noticeable that the video quality is significantly weaker compared to the main lens. If you look closely at the tiles or greenery, everything looks more washed out than in shots from the main camera of the X200 Pro, and stabilization works worse when using digital zoom. The shaking is noticeably stronger than on the main lens of the Pro. When filming a person with digital 1x zoom, it becomes even more obvious how much the detail suffers. Hair, fabric texture, facial features. Everything looks blurry, and the optical background blur has almost completely disappeared, both in good lighting and against the light. The video on the X200 Ultra turns out weaker, but at least it handled jogging pretty well. The stabilization worked confidently enough, not falling behind the Pro version. We shoot everything around us at 2x, and here the videos on both smartphones look very similar. The only difference is that the image on the X200 Pro is a bit darker and more saturated. This is especially noticeable in the sky and the greenery. In the stabilization test, both didn't perform very confidently, but the X200 Ultra still holds the frame better, while the X200 Pro shakes noticeably more with every step.
Friends, right now I've activated 8K shooting at 30 frames per second. I'm filming Masha like this, so beautifully. But it's clearly visible that on the Vivo X200 Ultra, it feels like it's using an ultra-wide-angle lens. While on the Vivo X200 Pro, I have a regular lens, which means we end up with a different angle.
Of course, it's not entirely fair to compare the ultra-wide and the main lens, but unfortunately, 8K is only available on these lenses. The 8K footage from the main lens on the X200 Pro looks more interesting. The video is more contrasty, with nice optical background blur. If you film a person against the sun, the X200 Pro keeps the contrast on the face, while the X200 Ultra produces a flat image. When shooting with the light, both videos look pretty good, but you can see, for example, that the denim texture of my daughter's overalls gets lost on the X200 Ultra's ultra-wide lens.
Obviously, yes, of course. 8K here is definitely not using the main lens. It's the ultra-wide for sure. Whereas on the X200
Pro, we can turn on 2x zoom.
Well, on the X200 Ultra, we can't do this.
2x zoom on the X200 Pro, stabilization issues start to appear. The frame noticeably shakes, so it's better to shoot like this only when the camera is stationary. When filming everything around in 8K, we get different color tones, a yellowish tint on the X200 Ultra and a reddish one on the X200 Pro. There's also a visible difference in exposure. The Ultra clearly gives a darker result, which, by the way, means the sky is less overexposed. But both smartphones handle jogging well. The stabilization worked quite confidently.
Friends, right now I've come straight to the sea. You can hear the sound of the water, the sound of the sea. Right now, we're recording audio under normal conditions. Video recording mode, front-facing camera, 4K at 60 frames per second. Let's see how it sounds, especially when the wind... Will our smartphones be able to handle recording audio in these tough conditions? The wind is blowing pretty hard, so let's see how well you can hear me. First, this is how the video looks. Second, can you hear me?
With regular audio recording, I could barely hear any difference. Maybe the X200 Ultra suppressed the wind a bit better in some spots, but otherwise, my voice sounds almost the same on both.
I've just activated the voice isolation feature. 1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3. Vivo X200 Ultra, 4K at 60 frames per second. And this is the Vivo X200 Pro, 4K at 60 frames per second.
However, the voice isolation mode worked more precisely on the Ultra. It removes wind noise more effectively, whereas on the X200 Pro, gusts were still audible.
Friends, and now we're shooting a video portrait with a background blur effect. On the Vivo X200 Ultra, video portrait mode is available on the ultra-wide lens, the main lens, and the telephoto lens. Meanwhile, on the Vivo X200 Pro, we can only shoot using the main lens and the telephoto lens. And this is what it looks like when you record.
Both smartphones give us a pretty high-quality result with slightly different color reproduction, and both aren't too confident when it comes to handling the blur on my bangs. When running, both videos are stable, focus is not lost, and there are no problems with background blur.
Now let's continue shooting. On the Vivo X200 Ultra, I turned on the main lens at 1.5x, and honestly, it probably won't look very good right now. Only half my face will fit in the frame. There you go. The Vivo X200 Pro. Everything seems to be fine. Everything turns out well.
Filming yourself with the main camera on the X200 Ultra is, of course, extremely inconvenient. The shot turns out way too close up, and the autofocus periodically loses track of my face. In this regard, the X200 Pro looks much better, and when running, both smartphones perform confidently. No complaints here.
Here, it's important to note again that on the Vivo X200 Ultra, when we turn on video portrait mode and blur the background, can't zoom into 1x, so I can either shoot with the ultra-wide, the main lens, or the telephoto lens. I only need to turn off the blur, then I'll be able to zoom in, but the whole point of this effect is lost then. Meanwhile, on the Vivo X200 Pro, we just have 2 modes, 1 times, 3 times, and 7 times, and we get a normal, beautiful image with a background blur effect.
I'm doing the classic tracking shot. I walk around the person in a circle. I immediately noticed problems with the Vivo X200 Ultra. The smartphone really loses focus a lot, and it loses it completely, just like what used to happen with the Samsung S24 Ultra. The algorithms are clearly not optimized yet, and for now, portrait mode when moving around a subject on the X200 Ultra just doesn't work at all. The result is disappointing, both on the ultra-wide and the main lens.
Friends, this is what our footage looks like when shooting in strong stabilization mode. Vivo X200 Ultra 2.8K 60 frames per second and Vivo X200 Pro 2.8K 60 frames per second.
When shaking up and down, both gimbals perform similarly. But as soon as I start tilting the tripod, the X200 Pro shifts the image to the side, while the X200 Ultra keeps the frame steadier. I'll also point out the exposure behavior. With the X200 Pro, there are more noticeable jumps in brightness in the sky.
And now, the same thing. We only have 1x zoom on the X200 Pro and on the X200 Ultra.
With digital zoom at 1x, the X200 Ultra generally handles it well too, although the stabilization here works noticeably rougher and more abruptly than without zooming. As for the Pro, the main lens delivers smoother performance, but the frame itself shakes and wobbles more, especially when shaking side to side.
Now on both smartphones, I set it to 1.5 times zoom. So, the main lens is used on the X200 Ultra and a slight crop on the X200 Pro.
When switched to 1.5x, both devices still handle vertical shaking well. But as soon as you start tilting the smartphones, both images begin to jerk and tilt. Now let's switch to HDR, or more specifically, to Dolby Vision. And let's see how it performs on our smartphones. On the ultra-wide camera of the U200 Ultra, the video in standard mode actually looks better than in Dolby Vision. Here, the white balance is more accurate, without greenish tones, the sky is more vibrant, and the skin tone looks nicer without any yellowish tint. And even with backlighting, the ultra-wide handled it well, even when shooting in SDR. So what about the X200 Pro? Its ultra-wide camera didn't cope well with the sun in front, both in regular shooting and in Dolby Vision. The only noticeable difference is in color reproduction. The sky on the right is more saturated, the water doesn't have a turquoise tint, and the skin tone is brownish, whereas in SDR it shifts toward a reddish hue. If we put two Dolby Vision images side by side, we can see that the Ultra smartphone shows the sky much better. There's less glare from the sun, and overall the image is more contrasty. But I still don't like the greenish tint. On the Pro, the image is very bright, the sky is lit up, but the foreground is also better illuminated. If we compare Dolby Vision at 1x, nothing really changes on the Ultra, since it's still the ultra-wide lens. On the X200 Pro, the image is brighter, without any greenish tint, but the skin tone shifts toward red, while on the Ultra it's closer to brown. Let's switch to the main lens. On the X200 Ultra, we also turn on 1x and 5x on the U200 Pro. The Ultra delivers a pretty nice result, with a slightly cool white balance, but it doesn't handle sun glare very confidently, and the sky looks a bit washed out. The video on the right is warmer, with a more vibrant sky, but it has the same sun glare. I should note that the face looks better on the U200 Ultra, it's more contrasted, while on the Pro it seems to lack shadows. Both smartphones also support log recording, which gives us footage with a wide dynamic range, suitable for manual color grading later on. We can see that the sky is blown out on both smartphones, and unfortunately, basic color correction isn't enough to fix this. I should mention that we used the official LUTs from Vivo to color grade the log video. As a result, we got a darker and more neutral video on the Ultra, and a brighter one on the Pro. We see the same thing at 1 and 5 times zoom. Again, the Ultra produces a darker image, and the video's white balance turned out quite cool. On the Pro, once again, the result is brighter and looks warmer. But all of this can easily be adjusted if you spend more time color grading the video. Although, it's unlikely you'll be able to recover the blown-out sky here. Let's see how smoothly the new device switches between lenses while zooming. And I can say that all the transitions look pretty smooth. You can notice a slight change in white balance and stitching when switching to the telephoto lens. But overall, the result is good. The X200 Pro also has pretty smooth zoom transitions. The transitions are seamless both when switching from the ultra-wide to the main lens and during the next switch to the telephoto lens. Let's move on to the video zoom test. And here, it's important to go over the camera specs. The X200 Ultra has a main camera with 50 megapixels and an aperture of f1.69. The periscope camera is 200 megapixels with an f2.27 aperture, responsible for 3.7x optical zoom. The ultra-wide camera here is also 50 megapixels f2.0 with a 116-degree field of view. The X200 Pro is similar, but there are some differences. The main camera is 50 megapixels as well, but with a wider aperture. f1.57. The periscope is the same, 200 megapixels with 3.7x zoom, but with an f2.67 aperture. The ultra-wide is also 50 megapixels, f2.0, but the field of view is a bit narrower, 119 degrees. Let's see how the smartphones perform when zooming. Let's start with the ultra-wides. And here, the X200 Ultra performed more confidently. For example, it preserves the tile pattern better and more sharply. On the Ultra, 1x is a digital zoom from the ultra-wide, while on the X200 Pro, the main lens is used. And here, of course, the advantage goes to the optics. The video on the Pro version looks noticeably sharper. The main camera on the X200 Ultra only kicks in at 1x and 5x. If we compare it to 1x on the X200 Pro, the difference is already minimal. The Ultra reads small text a bit better, but that's only because of the higher zoom. You can read the text on the X200 Pro too, it's just a bit blurrier. At 2x, both smartphones deliver a very similar result. There's practically no difference. Let's move on to the telephoto lenses. Here, we have the same specs, 200 megapixels and 3.7x zoom. Again, neither smartphone has a clear advantage in terms of detail. At 5x, the level of detail stays about the same, but the X200 Ultra starts to show digital color distortions, especially around the edges of the letters. Switching to 10x, the image is still very similar, but the X200 Ultra shows more noise. And finally, at 20x zoom, the text is unreadable on both, but I should note that the X200 Ultra preserved the shade of the red lettering more accurately. Let's see if 8K makes sense for shooting static scenes. On the X200 Ultra, 8K is only available on the ultra-wide camera, but here the difference compared to 4K on the Pro is almost unnoticeable. Maybe the sharpness is slightly higher, but there's no significant advantage in quality. On the X200 Pro, 8K works on the main camera at 1x. And here, the advantage over 4K on the X200 Ultra at 1x is obvious. Sharpness is higher, and there's less noise. Text is easier to read. But when shooting at 2x, the 8K quality on the 200 Pro no longer gives us an advantage. The image on the left and right looks very similar. Let's move on to the slow motion test. Both smartphones can record video at 420 frames per second, and here you can immediately see the differences in color reproduction. On the X200 Pro, the image shifts to very warm tones and skin looks orange, but on the X200 Ultra, the white balance is more neutral and balanced. The Ultra also has a noticeable advantage in quality. The image looks sharper, and, for example, the tiles and stones near the bushes are rendered better. Now let's move on to shooting at 240 frames per second in Full HD. And here, all the differences remain. The Ultra once again delivers a sharper image with neutral color reproduction. However, both smartphones have issues with stabilization in this mode. Even when shooting handheld without moving, noticeable shaking can be seen in the frame. Let's see how smartphones handle macro video shooting. Here we have two identical telephoto lenses, and these are the ones Vivo has dedicated to macro shooting. So, the result is just what we expected. And it's excellent, both in the Ultra and the Pro versions. Even before this, I considered the X200 Pro the best smartphone for macro shooting. But now, the X200 Ultra can confidently be added to that list as well. Both smartphones can shoot time-lapse in 4K, which is awesome. They also both have a bunch of built-in presets for these kinds of videos, and that's actually really convenient. Let's check out the results. When there's a lot of light in the frame, the X200 Ultra produces a darker image than the X200 Pro. But when shooting in low-light conditions, it's the opposite. The Ultra's time-lapse comes out brighter, while the Pro's is noticeably darker. Because of this, in my opinion, the Ultra delivers a more striking and interesting night sky. Also, unfortunately, we run into the familiar problem with the X200 Pro's main camera again, a glare across the entire frame. We're done with video recording. Now let's move on to photos. Selfies taken against the sun turned out differently. Here, the X200 Pro handled it more neatly, with noticeably less glare. There's also a visible difference in color reproduction. The X200 Ultra has a yellowish tint, while the Pro version leans more toward red. But when it comes to detail, there are no differences. In the next photos, the same trend continues. On the left, yellow tones dominate, while on the right, there are more red hues. I'll also note that the X200 Pro shows a slight optical blur, while with the Ultra smartphone, the blur is not noticeable. Let's move on to portrait selfies. Here again, we see that the smartphones handle faces differently. With the X200 Ultra, the foreground is darker and the skin looks brownish. With the X200 Pro, faces are better lit, but the skin tone shifts toward red. At the same time, both models have issues with blurring. The Ultra has a noticeable flaw between my head and my daughter's head. On the X200 Pro, my bangs are processed rather roughly, and there are errors in the hair area around Maya. In the photo with my wife Anna, there are again issues with blurring, for example, in the hair or on the glasses chain. With the X200 Ultra, part of the glasses ended up completely blurred. And as for color reproduction and skin tone, everything is the same as before. We're taking pictures of people without any blur. And just to clarify right away, both smartphones are set to the standard color profile, Vivid Bright. It's enabled by default, and we're showing you exactly the results you get from the smartphone straight out of the box. In the photos taken with the ultra-wide lens, you can't see any difference at all, neither in quality nor in color. When shooting with the main lenses, I can already note that the X200 Ultra produces a brighter image, including better lighting on the foreground. On the Vivo X200 Pro, the photo looks more saturated and has higher contrast. On the X200 Pro, I switched to 2x zoom, and here the shots are almost identical. Let's move on to the telephoto lenses. We can see differences in skin tone. The X200 Ultra gives skin a reddish tint, while the Pro version makes the skin tone more yellowish. That's where the differences end. The next focal lengths are 7 and 4 times zoom on the X200 Ultra and 10 times zoom on the X200 Pro. And here, the photos turn out almost identical. The 10 times zoom again delivers a very similar result, and I don't see any differences in all subsequent digital zoom levels either. Both smartphones take excellent photos. We did another photo shoot, this time with my beautiful wife. And again, at almost every focal length, we get extremely similar shots. In some shots, one is a bit more contrasty, in others, the other is. Sometimes there's a slight difference in exposure, and that's it. The only exception is at 30 times zoom, where the X200 Pro couldn't handle the overexposure on the face, while the X200 Ultra preserved the skin well in that area. We're taking portrait shots. We set the blur to the same value, f2.8. By the way, some smartphones have different focal lengths. In practice, no matter how close up we shoot, there's absolutely no difference in color reproduction. I also like the blur effect on both. Both smartphones handle even my daughter Masha's fine hair with confidence. The same thing happened at the next photo session. The photos look almost identical. There's no difference even at the highest zoom levels. Overall, both devices deliver a solid result with pretty neat background blur. Both smartphones can shoot portraits in high resolution. On the Vivo X200 Pro, these shots can only be taken with the telephoto lens, but the X200 Ultra offers more flexibility. You can take these portraits with either the main lens or using digital zoom. However, in the end, I don't really see any noticeable difference in quality. The X200 Ultra just offers more options in this mode. Let's move on to landscape photography. We're taking a photo with the ultra-wide lens. And here it's important to evaluate how the lenses focus when shooting from a low angle. The first photo looks very similar, but on the X200 Ultra the foreground is blurred a bit more, although the difference is minimal, and on other similar shots, there's no difference at all. With the other lenses, both smartphones produce interesting and high-quality shots. Sometimes you can notice differences in exposure and white balance, but overall, I like all the photos. Now let's move on to daytime shooting in RAW. And here, I recommend using Super RAW specifically to get the highest image quality. These shots should deliver better results compared to regular RAW, especially in low-light conditions. And we'll check that out a bit later. Photos are saved in two formats at once, JPEG and DNG, with higher resolution and noticeably larger file sizes. This is a great mode for those who want to get the most out of their shots. For color correction, we use Adobe Lightroom, but any other editor will work as well. And since the photos are saved in RAW format, you can edit the colors very flexibly and to your own taste. In this test, I like the results from both smartphones. Both provided excellent material for further editing. Let's move on to the food photography test. Both smartphones offer a dedicated food mode, where you can choose the level of blur and two focal lengths. The photos themselves turn out very similar, but the X200 Ultra shots are a bit darker. Although the difference is minimal, and in my opinion, both smartphones take appetizing photos. Let's move on to our traditional test. Let's see how smartphones handle thin objects like spoons and forks in portrait mode. At the first zoom level, the X200 Ultra did a pretty good job preserving the fork, but unfortunately, the X200 Pro didn't manage to handle the task. Although it's worth noting that the Pro was shooting from a greater distance. When switching to 35mm, the X200 Pro corrects itself and works more accurately, keeping the fork in the frame. However, it still lost the tip of the fork, unlike the Ultra. At 50mm, both smartphones start to struggle. The fork is recognized worse, but the X200 Ultra performed even weaker. It blurred it almost completely. At the next zoom level, the X200 Pro once again performs more confidently. It preserves the fork better. At the maximum zoom, the results are about the same. Both did a decent job. Let's move on to the second test, this time with a spoon. At 23mm, the X200 Pro once again erases the object, but at all subsequent zoom levels, the situation is stable. The spoon stays in focus and isn't lost on either smartphone. To sum up, both devices performed well, but in the fork test, the X200 Pro handled it more precisely than the Ultra flagship. Let's move on to the photo zoom test. We start with the ultra-wide lens, and here the results are almost identical. Small text is readable on both the Vivo X200 Ultra and the Vivo X200 Pro. Switching to the main cameras, the situation is similar. The text is readable in both photos, but on the X200 Ultra it looks a bit better, simply because of the higher magnification. If you turn on 2x zoom on the X200 Pro, the magnification becomes more comparable. And here's what's interesting, the digital zoom is not inferior to the optical zoom on the Vivo Ultra. With the telephoto lenses, we again get extremely similar quality, and the same holds true for all subsequent zoom levels, up to 30 times. There are no noticeable differences in detail. The smartphones are literally neck and neck. But at 60 times zoom, a difference starts to appear. The X200 Ultra is more aggressive in adding details, trying to produce a sharp result. On the X200 Pro, everything looks noticeably softer and more blurred. But at the same time, I can't say that the final shot from the Ultra model is objectively better. It's still hard to make out what's in the photo, and small text remains unreadable. It's the same story at the maximum digital zoom, 105x on the Ultra and 100x on the Pro. So overall, you could say it's a tie here. Let's move on to macro photography. On both smartphones, it's recommended to use the telephoto lens for this purpose, and in my opinion, that's a very convenient solution. This way, you can shoot macro from a comfortable distance, instead of right up close to the subject. And since both the X200 Ultra and X200 Pro are equipped with 200-megapixel telephoto lenses, the results we get are equally excellent. Detail, sharpness, depth, all are top-notch. In my opinion, this is currently the best macro photography on the market. Let's move on to the snapshot mode. It's only available on the main camera and the telephoto lens, with several digital zoom levels. The X200 Ultra offers 5 focal lengths, while the X200 Pro has 4. The mode is called the same on both smartphones, and it works very similarly as well. Even when shooting small objects in fast motion, the focus remains locked, and the shots themselves come out sharp and high quality. Now let's move on to the burst shooting test. And here we have something new. With the Vivo X200 Ultra, you can take up to 100 shots in a single burst, while the X200 Pro is limited to 20 shots. However, on the Ultra, this burst mode is only available on the main lens. They can't be made for ultra-wide angles. So what about the results? Let's take a few random shots from the burst series. Both smartphones did an excellent job. I'm in focus, and so are the Racket and the Shuttlecock. The only differences are in color reproduction and contrast. But once again, the X200 Pro catches glare on the main lens. That's already a familiar story. It's getting dark here. It's time to take a look at the photo and video tests in low light.
And our first test is the front camera shooting in 4K at 30 frames per second.
Both smartphones, and by the way, right now we're going to test one effect.
Right now, I've turned off the white balance lock. Let's see how
The smartphone will respond as I move around.
go when I periodically step into the shade. How will the smartphones handle this? With this kind of shooting,
With automatic white balance, we get a very similar result. Maybe the X200 Ultra's image is a bit warmer, but the difference is really minor. When running, both cameras performed poorly. The image shakes and jitters.
Alright, now I'm filming with the white balance lock turned on.
That is, our white balance is locked. And no matter how I turn now, around the light,
The white balance won't change, which is definitely a good thing for this kind of shooting. So, in this way, we
can essentially lock the white balance, and this way get
quite a good result.
If you lock the white balance by color, there aren't really any noticeable changes. The colors stayed pretty much the same as before.
And this is what video recording looks like if you shoot in 4K at 60 frames per second.
When shooting at 60 FPS, The first thing you notice is the difference in detail. The Vivo X200 Pro does a noticeably better job preserving hair, skin texture, and clothing details. While the X200 Ultra's image looks more blurred, there's still a difference in color reproduction as well. On the Ultra, skin tones shift toward yellow again, while on the X200 Pro, they lean more brownish. In terms of stabilization, both smartphones performed about the same at 60 frames per second. We don't see any significant improvements here.
And now we're shooting a video portrait, full HD, 30 frames per second, on both smartphones. But with the background blur effect, the aperture is set to f2.8.
In portrait mode, we once again see that the X200 Pro has higher detail, and that's pretty strange, considering the technical advantage of the X200 Ultra. The situation with color reproduction has only changed slightly. On the Ultra, skin tones now shift even more toward yellow, while on the X200 Pro, they lean toward a brownish red. During the run, the Pro performed a bit more confidently. Its image remains more stable, whereas the X200 Ultra has noticeable, abrupt jerks.
Alright friends, we're continuing the tests. Ultra-wide lens. Filming everything around.
In this shot, I didn't touch the white balance.
Didn't block it.
Let's move on to nighttime shooting of everything around, without locking the white balance. Here, the X200 Ultra shifts toward a reddish tint, while the X200 Pro leans more yellowish. But the main thing is that the Pro version already shows serious stabilization issues even while walking. When running, the situation only gets worse. The X200 Ultra keeps the video steady, while the X200 Pro shakes a lot and loses smoothness.
Friends, this is what the footage looks like with the flashlights turned on. On the Vivo X200 Ultra, I turned on the flashlight. And on the Vivo X2 Pro, I turned on the flashlight to film myself. Like this, using the ultra-wide-angle lens. Will these flashlights actually help me out when filming like this? Because honestly, there isn't that much light here, just a few flashlights. By the way, right now I set it so that the white balance doesn't get locked. So the color of the face, can constantly change.
When filming yourself in low light conditions, I highly recommend turning on the flashlight. It provides consistent lighting on your face, and the video ends up with more even exposure. As for video quality, the X200 Ultra is really disappointing. The face is blurry, overexposed, and there are almost no details, while the X200 Pro delivers a much sharper and more detailed image. I suspect that the Ultra uses a longer exposure here to stabilize the image, which is why we end up with these video quality issues. In terms of stabilization when filming yourself, both ultra-wide cameras performed pretty well, although the X200 Pro does show slightly more noticeable background shake.
Alright, now I've enabled white balance lock. 4K at 30 frames per second, filming myself.
With white balance lock enabled, both videos became a bit cooler in tone, but that might be due to changes in the external lighting. There is no significant difference, but we see a deterioration in the X200 Pro stabilization. The background began to shake more strongly, and blur appeared.
Now I've set it to 4K at 60 frames per second. White balance is locked, and now, in theory, the image should be more stable.
When switching to 60 FPS, the image on both smartphones became noticeably warmer, but there's no change in video quality. The X200 Ultra still has a soft, almost blurry look on faces, while the X200 Pro shows more detail and sharpness.
Friends, this is what 4K shooting at 60 frames per second looks like using the 1x lens on the Vivo X200 Ultra. We're getting a crop. It's just a slightly cropped image from the ultra-wide.
The crop from the ultra-wide on the X200 Ultra looks really weak, especially compared to the main lens on the Vivo X200 Pro. Facial details, clothing, and hair are all blurred, and the video quality is noticeably worse. And as for using the main 1.5x lens to film myself, I just don't see the point at all. I can barely even fit into the frame. The only thing I'll point out here is the obvious out-of-focus issue on the Ultra's main lens. It keeps jumping back and forth between the foreground and the background. In terms of color, the image from both smartphones turned out similar on the cooler side. On the X200 Ultra, the skin tone shifts toward greenish hues, while on the X200 Pro, it leans more toward blue, which is probably due to the street light illumination. In terms of stabilization, both devices performed similarly. The background stays pretty steady. Meanwhile, I specifically came to a well-lit area. Let's see here which shooting mode is better to use in these conditions, 30 FPS or 60 FPS. We'll start with the ultra-wide lens. Here, the difference in white balance is minimal, but when shooting at 60 FPS, the image becomes a bit smoother, which you can already notice while walking. When running, video at 60 FPS also holds up a bit more steadily, but at the same time, there's some motion blur that wasn't present at 30 FPS. When filming yourself, the result is almost identical in both modes. The only difference is that at 60 FPS, the image is a bit brighter, but there's no difference in stabilization. Let's look at the results on the X200 Pro when filming everything around. And here, it's the same story. At 60 FPS, stabilization gets a bit more confident, but there's motion blur, and when filming yourself, the videos are almost identical too. Let's switch to 1x on the X200 Ultra. Here, when filming everything around, there's no visible difference in stabilization at all, just a slight difference in white balance. When filming yourself, there are no differences either in color or stabilization. Interestingly, on the X200 Pro at 60 FPS, stabilization actually got worse when filming everything around. The shaking became more noticeable, especially when running. But when filming yourself, the result is the same on both the left and right. Let's turn on the main lens at 1.5x on the Ultra smartphone. Here, besides the differences in color reproduction, we also see a difference in stabilization. At 60 FPS, the situation clearly got worse, and the video became more jittery. When filming yourself, there are slight differences in white balance and tone, but otherwise the shots are very similar. Unfortunately, autofocus works poorly in both modes. With this level of zoom, there are no visible differences in stabilization to the naked eye, so shooting at 60 FPS on the Vivo X200 Pro and Ultra doesn't provide any noticeable advantage, and in some cases, actually makes the stabilization worse.
Alright, friends, so this is what our filming setup looks like. If you shoot in 8K at 30 frames per second, the only thing is, on the Vivo X200 Ultra, it's an ultra wide-angle lens, while on the Vivo X200 Pro, it's a 1x lens.
Both images turn out cold, but with different tints. The X200 Ultra's video has a greenish tint, while the X200 Pro leans toward blue. It's hard to judge the overall quality when filming everything around, but I should note that the X200 Pro noticeably blurs the image while moving, whereas the Ultra smartphone's footage looks more stable. But when running, both lenses struggle. The stabilization doesn't really keep the frame steady.
This is what the video looks like if you film yourself in 8K at 30 frames per second on both smartphones.
When filming yourself, you get two quite different results. The X200 Pro has a nice optical background blur. The X200 Ultra doesn't have this effect. The white balance and skin tone are also different. With the Ultra, the color shifts toward orange, while the Pro version leans more toward red. At the same time, both smartphones handle stabilization decently, although both show noticeable shaking, and the Ultra has some blurring.
Friends, this is what our filming setup looks like. A video portrait with a blurred background effect. We are shooting with the Vivo X200 Ultra at 0.6x. 4K at 30 frames per second on the Vivo X200 Pro 1x. And this is what the background blur looks like when we're filming, when there's plenty of light.
In portrait photography, the background blur on both smartphones looks neat. The edges are well defined, without any major mistakes. In terms of detail, the X200 Pro at 1x looks more confident than the video from the X200 Ultra's ultra-wide camera. There are also differences in skin tone. Under direct lighting, the X200 Ultra shifts the skin tone towards red. On the Pro version, it shifts towards orange. As for the shadows, both smartphones give the skin a yellowish tint. When it comes to stabilization, the cameras performed quite well.
Now we're filming at 1.5x on the Vivo X200 Ultra. The face is cropped in. On the Pro, we shoot 1x 4K, 30 frames per second with background blur. Unfortunately, I can't turn on the flashlight in this mode. That's a real shame. It's strange that the company hasn't implemented such a cool feature.
Of course, shooting yourself at 1.5x zoom is not an option at all. Your face takes up almost the entire frame, and it's nearly impossible to evaluate the blur effect in such conditions. The skin tone here remains just as I described above. As for stabilization, overall the footage turned out smooth, without shaking or blurring. Let's move on to the next test, panning around people. Just like during the day, the X200 Ultra doesn't handle it well. My daughter and I are out of focus, the camera blurs when moving, and the background is barely blurred at all. And in terms of quality, the main lens on the X200 Pro once again looks better. It delivers a sharper and more detailed image. When shooting at 1.5x on the X200 Ultra, the situation improves, the background gets blurred, there's no loss of focus, although faces still get blurred when the camera moves. Let's move on to night shooting with zoom, starting with the ultra-wide lens. Here, the Vivo X200 Ultra performs a bit more confidently. The letters on the sign are at least readable, whereas the X200 Pro blurred them a lot, and you can only make out the letter D. At 1x zoom, the X200 Pro does better, since it's using the main camera, while the Ultra is just cropping from the ultra-wide lens. Now we switch to the main lens on the X200 Ultra, while on the X200 Pro we move to 1.5x zoom. Interestingly, here the digital zoom on the Pro version is just as good as the optical zoom on the Ultra. At 2x zoom, the advantage shifts to the X200 Ultra. It preserves both the sign itself and its color better. On the right, the text is just overexposed. Let's switch to the telephoto lenses. And here, as expected, it's a tie. The images are identical in terms of detail. It probably won't surprise you that with all the following digital zoom levels, the smartphones deliver the same result. There's no visible difference in sharpness or quality, so there's no point in dwelling on this for too long. But what's really interesting is to check whether a higher frame rate makes any difference when comparing 30 and 60 FPS while zoomed in. Unfortunately, neither the X200 Ultra nor the X200 Pro showed any advantage at 60 FPS. The video remains just as noisy, with no visible improvement in detail or clarity. Now let's see if there's any point in using 8K while zoomed in under these conditions. With the X200 Ultra, shooting with the ultra-wide lens at higher resolution really does give slightly better quality. There's more sharpness and less noise compared to 4K on the X200 Pro, and the letters are easier to read. On the X200 Pro, the 8K result, which is available on the main lens, also looks better and sharper than 1x on the X200 Ultra. But if we zoom into 2x, the video view turns out to be higher quality, with accurate color cutouts and slightly distinguishable letter outlines. On the Pro, though, we see overexposure, noise, and the text is completely blurred. Now let's see how smartphones handle taking selfies in low light conditions. In the first photo, you can immediately see the difference in color. The X200 Ultra delivers a more natural skin tone, while the X200 Pro gives the skin a pronounced orange tint, making the whole shot look too warm. The Pro version also has noticeably lower contrast. This is especially noticeable in the sky. The Ultra smartphone handles light sources better. It has significantly fewer flares and glare from streetlights. Let's look at the second photo with my wonderful family. Here, the difference is minimal. The color reproduction is similar, and the skin tone is only slightly different. The only thing is that the X200 Pro's shot is a bit brighter. In the third photo, the situation repeats itself. The differences are minor. Again, the skin tone is slightly different. On the X200 Ultra, it looks softer and more natural, while on the X200 Pro, it's a bit more saturated. Let's move on to portrait selfies. A little photo session with my daughter Maya. In the first photo, you can see that the Vivo X200 Pro has some issues with skin tone. The skin takes on a strong yellow tint, and the whole picture looks noticeably warmer. On the X200 Ultra, the colors look more pleasant and closer to natural. When it comes to background blur, both smartphones didn't do a perfect job, but on the Pro version, my bangs look worse. The blur boundary turned out rougher, and you can see more unblurred areas. The next shots turned out very similar, with only a slight difference in skin tone. But when it comes to blur, the X200 Ultra once again handles it more neatly. The X200 Pro has more errors around the edges and uneven blurring. In the third photo, the blurring situation remains the same. The Ultra is more precise, but the color rendering has changed. Now the skin tone on the X200 Ultra shifts toward yellow, while on the X200 Pro, it becomes more pinkish. We're taking photos of people with the main camera module. With the ultra-wide lens, the results are very similar, but on the Vivo X200 Ultra, the image shifts toward yellow tones, while on the Vivo X200 Pro, it leans more toward reddish hues. At the next zoom level, the situation changes. Now, the yellow tint appears on the X200 Pro, and this remains the case when switching to 2x zoom as well. With the telephoto lenses, the difference in color reproduction remains, but in terms of quality, contrast, and exposure, the photos are almost identical. Next up is another zoom level, and here you can really see just how aggressively the algorithms are working. Both smartphones significantly boost sharpness and detail, especially on faces, even adding in tiny elements. At 10 times zoom, it's the same story. The shots come out almost identical, with the only difference being in color reproduction. At 15 times zoom, the photos from the X200 Ultra turned out a bit blurrier, but it's possible the phone just shook during the shot. We'll check this again in the second photo session. At 20 times and 30 times zoom, the X200 Ultra already delivers a sharper result, and the shots turn out quite decent for these conditions. The X200 Pro also does a good job, but at the highest zoom level, it falls a bit short in terms of detail. For example, the eyes look noticeably sharper on the Ultra smartphone. We're doing a second photo session to get a more accurate assessment of this kind of shooting. And as for color reproduction, there's nothing new I can add here. But again, at certain focal lengths, both smartphones show some blur or out of focus areas. With the Pro, we see this issue at 10 times zoom, and with the Ultra at 30 times zoom. Let's move on to testing portrait photos with the main camera module. Both smartphones have an aperture of f/2.8 for the blur effect. In the first photo, we can see that the X200 Pro has higher exposure, which makes the foreground look quite bright. As for color reproduction, once again the Pro shows a yellowish tint, while the 200 Ultra has reddish tones. When switching to 35mm on the Pro, the situation doesn't change. Switching to 50mm, we once again see the same color tones on both smartphones. As for the blur effect, so far the results are pretty similar and everything looks good. At the next focal length, 85mm, there are already some differences in the blur. The 200 Pro handles my daughter's hair more harshly. It cuts off and blurs the fine, thin hairs at the edge of the blur, whereas the Ultra preserve them. Next shot. Here, the color rendering situation has changed. The Pro has a beautiful and quite natural skin tone, while on the Ultra it shifted to a saturated orange hue. However, it's the X200 Ultra that once again handles my daughter's hair better. And let's take a look at another photo session. Here, overall, the result looks very similar. Once again, the only thing that varies is the color rendering. With higher zoom, you can see that both smartphones struggle with fine hair, sometimes cutting it out, sometimes blurring it. But to sum it up, in most cases the Ultra still handled these kinds of nuances more carefully. Let's take a look at landscape photos in these conditions. When shooting with the ultra-wide lens on the Vivo X200 Ultra, it handles light sources better. For example, here the street light is preserved better and there's less glare from it. The color reproduction looks similar, with slight differences in white balance. We switch to the main lens on the Ultra smartphone and use 1.5x digital zoom on the 200 Pro. And what can I say here? Both smartphones give us good and very similar results. The shots come out sharp, with pleasant color reproduction and good detail. Now we're shooting at 3.7x. Here, you really can't see any difference between the photos at all. It actually looks really impressive. The detail and color reproduction are top-notch. We're testing how smartphones handle photo zoom in low light conditions. On the ultra-wide lens, both smartphones deliver very similar results. I can't single out anyone yet. At 1x zoom, the advantage goes to the X200 Pro. Here, the main camera is in use, while on the Ultra, it's a digital crop from the ultra-wide lens. Let's switch to the main lens on the X200 Ultra. But the comparisons aren't entirely accurate because of the different framing sizes. The Ultra seems to have higher sharpness, but the shot itself is closer in. At 2x zoom, the X200 Ultra confidently takes the lead. You can easily read the small text, whereas on the X200 Pro it looks blurry. Now let's move on to the telephoto lenses. At 3x and 7x zoom, both smartphones show roughly the same level of detail. That's not surprising, considering the telephoto lenses are the same here. At 5x zoom, the X200 Pro delivers more legible text, while the Ultra shows noticeable blur. Now let's compare 7.4x on the X200 Ultra and 10x on the X200 Pro. Once again, the Pro version has the advantage. Its text is sharp, while the Ultra is blurry again. At 10x zoom on both smartphones, the same difference remains. X200 Pro handles it better. At 30x and 60x, both devices deliver similar results without any noticeable advantage. But at the maximum 105x zoom, the X200 Ultra relies much more heavily on algorithms. The image is cleaner, with less noise, and the text is smoothed out and readable without the pixelated jagged edges that we see at 100x on the Pro. Let's move on to nighttime raw photos. We're shooting in SRAW. Despite using a long exposure and higher quality settings, the very first super raw photo taken with the ultra-wide lens shows noise in the sky, and it's impossible to remove it during post-processing. The mode also doesn't always handle light sources well. In some shots, it fails to eliminate the glare around streetlights. However, if the streetlight is closer to the center of the frame, it's possible to work with it. In that case, the result turns out quite decent. Switching to 1x, we run into problems again. Glare and flares from the streetlights remain in the photos even when trying to correct them. It's the same situation in the next shot. When the main lens is activated on the X200 Ultra, the area near the statue is overexposed, and the glare from the streetlight can't be removed, just like on the Pro. Raw shooting with the telephoto lenses looks pretty good, but there's still digital noise in the sky on both smartphones. Let's move on to shooting the moon on both smartphones. This mode is found in landscape shooting and turns on automatically. With the ultra-wide lens, the moon isn't visible on either smartphone. Here, I can only point out the difference in color. The 200 Ultra gives a softer result with a precise white balance, while the Pro shows a very yellow foreground, but at the same time a beautiful, rich night sky. With the main camera, the moon already appears in the shot on the X200 Pro, and you can also see more stars. On the X200 Ultra in this mode, it's just a bright, overexposed circle so far, and the stars are barely visible. When switching to 2x zoom, the X200 Pro once again delivers a decent result. The moon looks pretty good. With the telephoto lens, the moon also becomes visible on the X200 Ultra, but it looks a bit blurrier than on the Pro version. It's the same story at the next zoom level, 7.4x. But starting from 30x zoom and up all the way to the maximum zoom, both smartphones produce almost identical shots. The only differences are in the white balance. And of course, overall, the results from the X200 Pro leave a better impression than those from the Ultra. The Vivo X200 Ultra has an interesting feature called AI Visual. It allows you to quickly and efficiently edit photos using artificial intelligence. There are plenty of pre-made presets available, and the processing itself is very fast. And most importantly, the results actually turn out great. But there's a catch. This feature requires an internet connection to work. It's also interesting how you activate it. On the Ultra, the filters are accessed through the landscape and night modes, whereas on the X200 Pro, they're found in portrait mode. Yes, the Chinese version of the X200 Pro also has similar filters, but there are only 4 of them, and we've already shown them in previous videos. In the global version of the X200 Pro, this option is completely missing. Let's move on to shooting with long exposure. Both smartphones make it easy to shoot in this mode, offering ready-made templates and presets for different scenes. Thanks to this, you can easily get these cool and impressive shots. And here, both devices are truly impressive. There's really nothing more to add. Let's move on to testing photo uploads on Instagram. Here, it's important to understand exactly how the social network processes uploaded images. We've already shown several times how photos change here after being uploaded. After publishing, the images become a bit wider, and this is especially noticeable in portraits and selfies. Instagram also automatically increases the image's saturation. So keep that in mind when uploading your photos. Let's talk about batteries. Both smartphones come with a 6,000 mAh battery using silicon carbon technology. But there are some nuances. The X200 Ultra supports fast wired charging at 90 watts and wireless charging up to 40 watts. There's also reverse charging. The X200 Pro also has 90-watt wired charging, but its wireless charging is weaker, just 30 watts. Reverse charging is supported as well. So, how did the batteries hold up after filming? At the end of the first day, the X200 Ultra had 41% left, while the X200 Pro had 45%. On the second day, the gap became even bigger. The Ultra finished with 31%, while the Pro still had as much as 51% left. It's important to note that on both days, we started with both smartphones fully charged at 100%. So what about the displays? At first glance, the X200 Ultra and Pro are equipped with very similar screens, but there are still some differences. The X200 Ultra features an AMOLED display measuring 6.82 inches, with a resolution of 3168 by 1440 pixels and an adaptive refresh rate ranging from 1 to 120 Hz. The X200 Pro screen is a bit smaller, 6.78 inches. It's also AMOLED and has the same refresh rate, but the resolution is lower at 2800 by 1260 pixels. Let's measure the PWM frequency. At 100% brightness, the X200 Ultra measured 7%. The X200 Pro was slightly higher at just over 4%. At half brightness, the PWM level is a bit higher, about 9% for the Ultra and around 8% for the Pro. At roughly 15% brightness, the X200 Ultra showed about 6% PWM, while the X200 Pro's value rose to 14%. At minimum brightness, we see about 5% for the Ultra and around 12% for the Pro. In the end, the X200 Ultra offers more stable performance without sudden jumps, while the X200 Pro's flickering becomes noticeably stronger as brightness decreases. However, both displays will still be comfortable to use for people sensitive to PWM. Let's move on to the performance test. The smartphones have different processors. The Vivo X200 Ultra is equipped with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 Extreme Edition paired with an Adreno 830 GPU. The Vivo X200 Pro has a MediaTek Dimensity 9400 with graphics handled by the Immortalis G925. Let's start the measurements in Antutu. Here, the Vivo X200 Ultra performed faster and scored higher in the test results. We're testing the processor in Geekbench. Once again, The X200 Ultra finishes the test faster and shows higher results in both single-core and multi-core scores. Now, let's move on to the GPU test. Here, on the contrary, the X200 Pro handled it faster and scored significantly more points, 21,500 compared to 18,600 for the Ultra. Now we're running a stability test on the smartphones under prolonged load in 3D Mark, and at the same time we're checking their temperatures. The X200 Ultra showed 51.2%, while the X200 Pro scored 52.2%, and the higher the percentage, the better. So it turns out that the Pro, although only slightly, is more stable. Looking at the temperatures, you can see that the X200 Ultra heated up to 50 degrees, while the X200 Pro reached 44. I personally recorded slightly higher values during manual measurements. The temperature on the Ultra reached up to 55 degrees, so I'd say that if we're talking about long gaming sessions, the X200 Pro would be the better choice. Now, let's test the connection speed on a gigabit network. We're running the tests one after another on the same router. The Vivo X200 Ultra showed a download speed of 797 megabits per second and an upload speed of 513 megabits per second. The Vivo X200 Pro delivered even higher results, 825 megabits per second for download and 808.6 megabits per second for upload. Now, let's measure the speed of the mobile network. The carrier is the same and the conditions are as identical as possible. On the Ultra smartphone, we see 49 megabits per second for download and about 10 megabits for upload. That's a very low value. I run another test, but the situation hasn't really changed. Only 42 megabits for download and about 6 for upload. The Pro, on the other hand, reached 139 megabits for download and about 50 for upload. The difference is significant, and honestly, it's a big question as to what causes it. If you know friends, be sure to let us know in the comments. Let's move on to artificial intelligence. Vivo brings together its AI features under the Blue AI brand. In the settings, you can find a range of options, including Jovi. This is a built-in voice assistant and consultant with a wide variety of smart scenarios for everyday life. However, there's an important nuance. Most of these features are aimed at the Chinese market and only work on the Chinese firmware. So, you shouldn't expect the same level of integration and functionality as you get with Samsung or Google here. Let's test out the intelligent object removal from photos. I'm trying to remove a plant from the frame. The X200 Pro didn't recognize it right away, but once the object finally disappeared, the result turned out pretty good. Only the shadow of the already removed plant remains. The result is similar with the X200 Ultra, although it would make sense for the smartphones to highlight and remove both the shadow and the object together, but neither of them does that. Let's try removing the flower pots. With the Pro, the shadow is left behind again, and with the Ultra, there are even leftover pieces of the pots in the photo. If you try to remove small objects in the background, both phones can't handle it anymore. I try removing just the shadow from the wall. Both smartphones handle this task confidently. As for other camera features, they've almost all been carried over from the X200 Pro. There are detailed retouching and makeup settings, tons of filters for different scenes, and a variety of creative effects. There's also the so-called photo repair feature. There are advanced filters and stylization options that can be downloaded from the internet. Lens flares, bokeh, creative modes. There are truly a lot of creative possibilities here.
Well, friends, let's sum things up. I bought this smartphone on pre-order in Spain from the Gistop website for $1,399. That was on April 22nd, and they only sent it to me 20 days later. I waited 20 days for this smartphone, friends. It was absolutely not worth the wait. Also, with the pre-order, I was supposed to get a photography kit, basically a photographer's set. But to this day, I still haven't received that kit. I waited a really long time for this smartphone, and in the future, I definitely won't be buying a smartphone from Gistop again.
So, is it really worth paying extra for the Ultra version right now? Let's figure it out.
And as usual, let's talk about the advantages of the Vivo X200 Ultra. And the first advantage I'd like to point out about this smartphone is, of course, the brand new ultra-wide camera. I really like the ultra-wide-angle lens on the Vivo X200 Ultra. First of all, this ultra-wide now fits a lot more into the frame than my Vivo X200 Pro does. That's definitely a plus. And also, in low-light conditions, this ultra-wide-angle lens performed really well when I was shooting everything around me. Again, with this ultra-wide, you can shoot 8K video. Finally, Vivo has introduced really good Dolby Vision recording on the front camera. I like the color grading of this kind of video. The image had a pleasant, natural color and, at the same time, significantly outperformed the Vivo X200 Pro in terms of dynamic range. Another plus. It's really great that Vivo made a good main lens,
And this lens didn't produce any glare at all for me, whereas with the X200 Pro, that's probably the main downside of the main lens if you're shooting in good lighting or even in low light. Very often you'll get glare hitting the lens directly while recording video. Sometimes, there's just nothing you can do about that glare. And of course, it ruins the image, especially when shooting video, whereas with photos, it's very easy to get rid of it. But on the Vivo X200 Ultra, I didn't get any glare at all, not on the ultra-wide lens, not on the main lens, and not on the telephoto lens. From the perspective of shooting photos in Pro mode, I really liked this smartphone because, finally, Super RAW is now available in high quality on the ultra-wide lens. I took a lot of shots, and honestly, with the ultra-wide lens on the smartphone, in low-light conditions using S-RAW, the photos turn out more interesting than on the Vivo X200 Pro. Another advantage is the new AI features that you can use on the Vivo X200 Ultra. I really like the landscape and night modes. If you select and activate the AI features, the shots turn out really awesome, and the number of different presets is just mind-blowing. You can turn any photo into a real masterpiece, enhanced with artificial intelligence. But of course, you need an internet connection for that. While the Vivo X200 Pro also has these features, unfortunately, there are fewer of them compared to the Vivo X200 Ultra. Also, now we have the option to shoot slow-motion video in 4K at 120 frames per second with the ultra-wide lens, whereas the Vivo X200 Pro can only do this with the main lens and the telephoto lens. I was also a bit surprised by how the smartphone stabilizes video when shooting with the main lens, which is 35mm or 1.5x. Considering that this isn't exactly a standard focal length and is unusual for most people, the stabilization at 1.5x works quite well while walking, although there are, of course, some issues when running. But overall, the fact that Vivo managed to implement such stabilization in the 35mm shooting mode is actually pretty impressive. What other advantage would I highlight in the Vivo X200 Ultra? Now, in landscape and night modes, you can either enable or disable the supermoon feature. What is the supermoon mode? It's when, in any photo basically, at any focal length starting from 1x, the moon is artificially added by AI. Sometimes, that's not necessary. For example, I might just want to take a picture of the moon as a simple bright spot in the sky, but the X200 Pro will always add the moon in landscape mode. Meanwhile, on the Vivo X200 Ultra, you can now manually turn off the supermoon mode, so it won't artificially add the moon with AI in landscape and night modes. Well, friends, we've talked about the pros. Now let's talk about the cons. And the first, and probably the main drawback of this smartphone is actually these inconvenient 35mm. This smartphone is probably more suited for photographers, because shooting video, especially with the main camera module, like this, is honestly a really bad idea. If I shoot with the smartphone like this, with my arm fully extended, I can only fit my head in the frame, and that's it. I can't do anything else. And that's why, to get a different shot, I have to use the ultra-wide lens, which, if I crop it to 1x or 1.2x, gives much worse quality compared to what the Vivo X200 Pro provides. That's why I think this unique focal length is absolutely unsuitable for video recording. You just can't get a good shot holding it at arm's length. Meanwhile, with any smartphone from any other manufacturer we've reviewed, if you don't like the quality of the front camera, you can just flip the phone around like this, and everything turns out fine. You can easily get yourself in the frame. Your face is clearly visible, everything looks great, and there are no problems at all. So, of course, if you're used to filming yourself with the main camera module like this, holding it in your hand instead of using the front camera, then the Vivo X200 Ultra definitely won't work for you. Yes, it's fine for photos, but when it comes to video, it's super inconvenient. The second downside is the stabilization on the front camera. Okay, so if you couldn't comfortably film yourself with the main 1.5x lens, it would be great to at least get good footage with the front camera. But here it's only on the level of the X200 Pro. In fact, when it comes to video, the front camera here is probably one of the worst, because the stabilization is really weak. As soon as you start walking, the image shakes a lot. Of course, competitors like Samsung, iPhone, and even other Chinese brands like Xiaomi or Honor offer much better stabilization on the front camera. And so, to be honest, I have no idea what Vivo was thinking when they put a 35mm lens as the main camera and then gave the front camera the same treatment, but with such poor image stabilization. I honestly don't get what the point is. When it comes to shooting video with the front camera in low-light conditions, even though this phone has a 50-megapixel lens that, on paper, is better than the Vivo X200 Pro, in reality, the image on the Vivo X200 Pro was more detailed and of higher quality in low light. So the question is, how does Vivo make this work? The only way to get a decent shot of yourself with at least some stabilization is by using the ultra-wide lens. Yeah, it really is quite large here. And you can see that I fit in the frame with plenty of room to spare. So everything seems fine, there are no issues, but I really didn't like the color correction on this ultra-wide lens at all. If you're shooting in good lighting, like during the day, the image is still more or less okay. But when I used this ultra-wide lens to film myself in low light, the skin tone in the image was just terrible. I really hope that Vivo will fix this in future firmware updates. At least to the level of the Vivo X200 Pro. The Vivo X200 Pro has much better detail and skin tone on the ultra-wide lens in low light conditions than the Vivo X200 Ultra. So the main question is, why did Vivo do this? I was really hoping that Vivo would implement great portrait video on the front camera in 4K at 30 frames per second, like its closest competitors Samsung and iPhone do. And here, shooting with the front camera is still only full HD at 30 frames per second with a background blur effect. Again, the stabilization is really poor, falling far behind the competitors currently on the market. So honestly, I just don't understand what Vivo was thinking. But portrait shooting with the main camera module is even worse, because now we have constant focus loss. At the time of filming this video, I kept losing focus whenever I circled around a person. Even in good conditions, when we do a tracking shot circling around a person, both with the ultra-wide lens and the 1.5x lens, the focus kept drifting away from the face. I don't know why this happens, but we had a similar problem with Samsung. The S24 Ultra was constantly plagued by this focus loss issue. Only with the S25 Ultra did this mode start working perfectly, and it almost always delivers a really good result, even in low light conditions. And in this regard, the Vivo X200 Pro looks much more interesting. If you don't like shooting with the front camera, you can just set the smartphone like this and easily film yourself using both the ultra-wide and the main lens, and you get amazingly detailed video on par with all the top competitors. Whereas with the Vivo X200 Ultra, at the time of filming this video, you can't get that kind of footage. Another thing, I was really surprised that Vivo didn't implement 8K recording on the main lens. That was really strange. Meanwhile, on the Vivo X200 Pro, you do get 8K on the main lens. Yes, they did add 8K to the ultra-wide, and it's great here. We talked about that as a plus. But why not put 8K on the main lens? That's still a question for me. In many of our tests, we saw that the detail in 8K images significantly surpasses the detail in 4K video, especially in good lighting conditions, and even in low light as well. Often, if we're not moving the camera, 8K really does provide a more detailed image than 4K. In post-production, you can easily crop it, which is very convenient. Meanwhile, the Vivo X200 Ultra only allows us to shoot 8K using the ultra-wide-angle lens. I think that's definitely a drawback. Now let's talk about photography with this smartphone, the Vivo X200 Ultra. And essentially, there really aren't any advantages here compared to the Vivo X200 Pro. You'd probably need a microscope to spot these differences. All the tests I did, more or less, showed that the smartphones performed about the same. In some cases, the Vivo X200 Pro was better. In others, the Vivo X200 Ultra came out on top. So, I didn't see any significant leap in, say, dynamic range in photos or any kind of unreal level of detail. Even considering that in photo mode on the Vivo X200 Pro, by the way, it's really convenient. You can set it to 35mm and you get the same kind of shooting. So you have an ultra-wide, you have 1.5x, then 3.7x, and so on. And you can do the same thing, just adjust it on the Vivo X200 Ultra. And if you compare these shots, 35mm on the Vivo X200 Pro is basically a crop from the main lens at 35mm, while on the Vivo X200 Ultra, it's the main lens, and honestly, there's almost no difference. From a photography standpoint, the Vivo X200 Ultra didn't convince me at all compared to the Vivo X200 Pro. And again, when shooting in low light conditions, for some reason, in many shots, especially when we zoomed in up to 30 times, there was more blur on the X200 Ultra than on the Vivo X200 Pro. Most likely, the algorithms aren't well optimized yet, and that's probably why the Vivo X200 Ultra produced more blur. I hope this will be fixed with future updates, but for now, that's the situation. It's a real shame that Vivo removed my favorite mode. On the Vivo X100 Ultra, you could activate the pose mode. This is a really cool feature that teaches you how to take beautiful photos, how to pose correctly so your shots look interesting and not just like a passport photo. And unfortunately, they removed this mode in the Vivo X200 Ultra. I honestly don't understand why that happened. I understood why they didn't add it to the X200 Pro. Well, because it was kind of a feature of the X100 Ultra, so it made sense for it to stay exclusive there. But they could have added it to the Vivo X200 Ultra, yet unfortunately, that mode didn't make it there, and I think that's a missed opportunity. Another cool feature is the AR Planetarium, which I had on the Vivo X200 Pro.
And for some reason, Vivo didn't add this AR planetarium to its flagship smartphones, the Vivo X200 Ultra. Honestly, I'm really disappointed. My kids absolutely love this mode. Every time we go out to look at the night sky, they ask me to find this or that constellation, and the X200 Pro makes it possible. As of the time I'm recording this video, the X200 Ultra just doesn't have this mode. Now, in terms of battery performance. And, strangely enough, the X200 Pro lasted significantly longer on all the shooting days than the Vivo X200 Ultra. That's thanks to the super energy efficient processor here, which works just perfectly. I don't know about people who play games on their smartphones. I'm not sure if they like this Dimensity 9400 or not. Friends, if you play games on your smartphone and, have tried smartphones with Snapdragon and smartphones with the Dimensity 9400, be sure to let us know in the comments which smartphone you prefer for gaming. But I'll say that when it comes to photo and video shooting, the Vivo X200 Pro holds its battery charge much longer. Considering that I've had this smartphone for more than half a year now, and I've filmed a huge number of reviews with it, the battery here is definitely not new anymore, while the X200 Ultra has a completely fresh battery. Even so, it discharges significantly faster than the Vivo X200 Pro, and that, of course, is a downside of the Vivo X200 Ultra. What's another downside I would point out? It's this new button, the action button, specifically when it comes to taking photos. Chinese manufacturers really love to take inspiration from Apple, and they do it way in advance, without getting any feedback at all about this button. So I think it's a flop. It's just some kind of decorative element that's absolutely non-functional. This button is just plain inconvenient to use. I mean, it's way easier for me to take a photo by tapping on the screen. It's much quicker and makes it easier to adjust the focal length. I think the inclusion of this button wasn't thought through at all, and it's just not necessary. Using this button is absolutely uncomfortable. What's another downside I'd mention? This is a 3D Mark stress test. This smartphone got really hot because of the Snapdragon 8 processor, which is honestly very hot. My phone heated up a lot, and since I don't play games, I don't know how this processor performs in gaming. Guys, if you know, definitely let me know in the comments. I'd be really interested to read about it. The smartphone was extremely hot, especially these inserts, the metal inserts. They got, well, just incredibly hot. When I measured the temperature with my sensor, it showed 55 degrees Celsius, which, of course, is really uncomfortable to hold in your hand. That's why I didn't really like the Snapdragon 8 processor. But to be fair, during video recording, my smartphone didn't heat up, and in terms of regular video shooting, the phone always stayed pretty cool. Yes, sometimes it would warm up if I filmed for a long time or kept it in the sun, but overall, it was always comfortable to use, and I never had any physical issues with it.
It's also important to mention that we had difficulties with video files during the rendering stage. Some of the new clips lagged, frames were dropping, and the FPS would fall, which meant we had to convert some files beforehand. Friends, it's also very important to take into account which firmware version of the system and camera we had at the time of filming the video, because with new updates, the situation might change. Right now on the screen, we're showing screenshots of the latest installed firmware versions. With the Vivo X200 Ultra, I ran into another problem. I couldn't connect our work corporate email, no matter how hard I tried. On the screen now, you can see the version of Google services installed on the Ultra. On the X200 Pro, though, everything works without any issues. But here, the update version is actually newer, which is strange. Friends, if any of you have faced a similar problem with the X200 Ultra, let us know in the comments. I'd be interested to hear about your experience. So, should you go for the new model right now, or stick with the Vivo X200 Pro? Honestly, at this point, I'd say there's no reason to buy the X200 Ultra. When it comes to cameras, the new model doesn't really offer any special advantage. The front camera looks better on paper, but in reality, it just performs okay during the day and actually falls short in low light conditions compared to the front camera on the X200 Pro. The ultra-wide camera is still usable in good lighting, but when the light is lacking, the image quality turns out pretty disappointing. As for the main lens, you really can't get decent shots at 1.5x zoom, whether it's day or night. And when it comes to shooting everything else, the X200 Pro is just as good. When it comes to photography, the Ultra doesn't really stand out compared to the regular version. In terms of performance, the processor is a bit more powerful, but the graphics chip is weaker, and the battery life is worse. And that's all considering the significant price difference. So overall, if you're considering the Vivo 200 series, the Chinese Pro version is still the more optimal choice for now. If you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments. I'd be happy to read your thoughts and discuss Vivo's Ultra flagship with you. Be sure to like and subscribe, friends. And that's it. Bye-bye everyone.